eager to get into Q&A, but I'll just start off by telling you a little bit about myself and what I do, and then we can dive right in. My name is Jeff Mason. I'm a White House correspondent for Reuters. Eric will appreciate that I just hit my 20th anniversary at Reuters last year, and I got the job because of a tip from Mr. Kirschbaum. We met when I was a Fulbright a Fulbright stipendiat, exchange student, I guess, on a Fulbright exchange in 99 to 2000. And I was thinking I'd like to stay in Europe afterwards, and I went around and introduced myself to some English-speaking news organizations, and Reuters was one of them via Eric. And I ended up looking at a few different ones, but landed at Reuters in Frankfurt in 2000 and spent 3.5 years in the bureau there, covering the airline industry and covering the stock markets and broadly just business news before, transferring to Brussels in 2004. And I was in Brussels for about 3.5 years covering the European Union with a emphasis on energy, transport, and environmental policy. Had a great time in Brussels, and then applied in that year, 2007, to come back to the States, and ended up as the campaign political correspondent in 2008, covering the 2008 election, which at the time, all of us who were on the campaign trail, I think, thought would be our most exciting campaign we'd ever cover in our careers, because it was such a big deal, that campaign. Obama, Clinton, and then Obama, McCain, and the general. And it was so interesting and so, I think in some ways uplifting and historic, certainly because of the primary with a serious woman candidate in Hillary Clinton and a serious African-American candidate, Barack Obama. And then with Obama's win, the first African-American president of the United States. So we'll flash forward past that a little bit later, but it turned out not to be necessarily the most historical election, although it certainly was a big one in my career. After Obama's election, I moved into the White House and moved into the White House beat, I should say, more specifically, and have been covering that for the last almost 12 years. The first 8 years were covering the Obama presidency, and it was a fascinating presidency to cover. I think we forget now, because of how fast the news cycle moves and how sort of clever President Trump is at creating news and making stories move so quickly, that we had a huge story on our hands in the first few years of the Obama presidency too, and in particular with the near collapse of the economy right before he became president, and the multi-year recession and economic recovery. The first few years that I recall being at the White House, we'd get there really early, because you never knew if the day would start off with a rescue of the auto industry or banking or something like that, which all, of course, are big stories for everyone, but particularly for Reuters. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories covering Obama from the very first week of his presidency. Reuters has a team of correspondents that cover the White House, and at his first day in office, I was the late guy in our team. And I was sitting in the little Reuters booth, which is situated, if you can imagine, behind the press room that you would all have seen on television. And that's where the working press have workspace. And one of his aides walked down and probably knocked on my door and opened it up and said, "Hey, Jeff, Robert Gibbs, who was the press secretary at the time, wants you and a few others to swing by." So I grabbed my laptop, and I figured he was about to brief us on something at the very beginning of the presidency. And I grabbed my recorder, and we walked out of the press area, but instead of walking up to Robert Gibbs's office, we walked downstairs and into the residence part of the White House. the mansion. And we stopped outside what I now believe was the map room, and Gibbs stopped, and I was sort of flustered and grabbing my stuff and thinking, he's going to brief right here. And I was holding onto my laptop and thinking maybe I can type this, which of course I couldn't while standing. And he ended up generously and probably exasperatedly grabbing my recorder so that he could hold it, and then said to the four of us, out of an abundance of caution, President Obama is going to take the oath of office a second time. And then we waltzed into this room, the map room, and there was now President Obama, Chief Justice Roberts, and maybe 3 or 4 other people. And some of you may recall that on his initial inauguration day, both President Obama and Chief Justice Roberts had sort of flubbed the pledge or the oath of office. So they decided to avoid conspiracy theories sort of dashing or following the president for his entire term in office, that they would do it again. And it's one of my favorite stories, because it was a moment of just genuinely getting to see history happen. And there were only 10 people in the world who got to see that. And I was one of them, just because I happened to be working late that night and in the pool. So that's there. I've got more stories to tell if you want to follow up during the Q&A, but that's one of my favorites with Obama. The Trump years, of course, are now much more current and more in the news. It's kind of amazing to believe that we're only 2 weeks away from the 2020 election. Covering President Trump began for me by the fact that I was the president of the White House Correspondents Association in 2016 to 2017, which meant the last 6 months of Obama's presidency and the first 6 months of President Trump's presidency. That was particularly, it was a particularly tricky year for the press corps, as I'm sure all of you as informed people know. The president came in, obviously, as a non-politician and a former New York businessman who had been super critical of the press and had not had, this was very unique at the time, reporters on his plane during his candidacy. And so we came in not knowing if they were going to blow up the pool structure, the pool being the 13 reporters who travel with the president wherever he goes and cover him at both the White House and down the road, or blow up lots of other things related to norms that I think the American people in the world, and certainly the White House press corps, expect. So a few weeks before he came into office, in my role as president and with a couple colleagues on the Correspondents Association board, we went to New York and negotiated with the incoming press secretary, Sean Spicer, Hope Hicks, who's a senior aide, and Stephanie Grisham, who would later become press secretary, about basically our requirements or our red lines for the press corps, and had a dialogue about what they were expecting and what we were expecting. And I think it's fair to say I successfully negotiated that day to keep the pool intact and to keep the pool on Air Force One, which I'm very proud of. And it was a team effort, and it's something that has kept some norms going in the White House with the press corps, despite a lot of other norms being shattered. Some of the other challenges in the initial months of covering President Trump were related to his usage of terms and rhetoric against the press, such as calling us the enemy of the American people and fake news. And unfortunately, a lot of those terms now have become so common that other world leaders have adopted them, and this president, of course, continues to use them and finds a lot of support for that, particularly on the campaign trail and in his rallies. So that's been a challenge for us. We can talk more about this during Q&A if you're interested, but I do think that the press corps has has held up well over the last 3.5 years, but we've taken a lot of arrows, and that's been I think tough for democracy, but I think it's also been a show of what you can do as reporters and journalists. My presidency of the Correspondents Association ended in the summer of 2017, at which point I just went back to being a regular reporter, which was good. And since then, in my regular reporter status, you may have seen a few back and forths that I've had with the president. My own style in covering this president or any president is to sort of maintain what I think is a Reuters, but also a good journalism standard of staying neutral and not taking bait when it's sort of thrown at you, but staying calm and asking important and hard questions, but not seeking to become the story. In a few instances, you end up becoming the story, largely because of the drama of the Trump presidency, but it's not something that I have sought. But I do think it's emblematic, at least some of the exchanges that we've had, he and I, of how you can cover a president who is sort of as much of a showman as this president is, while also maintaining balance and maintaining neutrality. I guess I would close just by saying, or close my opening remarks anyway, by saying I feel as a White House reporter, both during the last 3.5 years and during the 8 years of the Obama administration, that it's a genuine privilege to get to see history take place up close. I don't think I maybe appreciated the role of the press and the importance of that role as much until the last 3.5 years, as this country has confronted the divisions that we have and the very controversial nature of President Trump's governing style and the role that journalists play, I think, in shedding light on truth and sticking up for truth and seeking facts. I would add as a caveat there that I think every administration and every president and every political candidate, for that matter, deals in spin, and that's a challenge for reporters to sort of navigate through regardless of who is in office. But the assault on facts, which I think is fair to say has been a cornerstone of President Trump's dealing with the press, has definitely been a challenge, and it's been tough. But I guess I say that as where I was going with that is also it is highlighted for me, as somebody who's now worked as a working reporter for 20 years, how important the work is that we do, and it's that importance applies whether you're a White House reporter like myself, or a local reporter, or a national reporter elsewhere in this country, elsewhere in Germany, or anywhere around the world. So it's great to be on the call with all of you. I'm a big fan of the RIAS program, and I look forward to chatting more.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. And I'm glad you remember the story from 20 years ago when you walked into the Reuters office and we had a chat for an hour or so. I always like talking to people looking to come to Reuters, because 30 years ago, somebody at AP did the same thing for me and spent an hour telling me how to get into AP. So I'm glad it worked out, and every time I see you standing up in the White House asking a question, I think, oh, I'm glad I helped him get into Reuters. So
you get all the credit. You don't get all the credit.
No. I mean, but I'm glad you took the ball and ran with it, and it's a good feeling. It's a good place, Reuters. So if you type your questions here, we'll call on you one by one. I'll just ask the first question, if I may, is I'm always amazed that you're able to get along, have a reasonable rapport with both President Obama and President Trump, that you really seem to have respect, or they respect you. And the encounter a week or two ago, or a few weeks ago, with the mask, I guess it was Labor Day with the mask, where you just stood your ground and politely kept asking your question, and he seemed to respect that, and then he answered your question with the mask on. And how is that possible? How are you able to do that where maybe some other journalists haven't been able to develop the rapport? What is it with President Trump that he respects you enough to let you leave the mask on and he'll answer your question without getting overly agitated? And also, what was the magic of getting the press pool on the White House, on the plane? Was there any magical argument you had to keep the press on the White House plane? Thanks.
Sure. Well, I'll take the first one first. I don't know that there's I don't have a secret sauce. It's just my style. And I think that the president does respect people who stand up to him. To be clear, though, that doesn't mean he won't hold a grudge. I mean, I had a moment last fall where he and the president of Finland were having a press conference where I asked a couple of direct questions about what he had expected from President Zelensky of Ukraine. And President Trump wanted me to move on, and I didn't. And that ended up sort of going viral. And the president didn't call on me for months afterwards. He was really mad about it. The mask thing, I think he was also mad about for a couple of weeks. It didn't last as long as the one last year did. But yes, he calls on me, and I think he respects me, but that doesn't mean he doesn't take it out on you if he feels like you've made him look bad, and maybe that's part of the answer, Eric. Like I don't go into it trying to make the president look bad. It's possible that some people do. My job, the way I see it, is just to get questions answered and to ask questions that matter for the news of the day and matter for the public discourse. And I feel a little like I have the benefit of a Reuters shield around me, because we are a neutral news organization. And, this is a longer conversation, but there are certainly some news organizations that are no longer, I think, as committed to neutrality as some are. And Reuters hasn't wavered on that. And that helps me in terms of, how I approach this job and how I would approach any job in journalism. To your second question, the negotiation that we had it was a good sort of back and forth about what we care about, and I identified, I believe, 3 things that we considered red lines, and one of them was the integrity of the press pool and staying on Air Force One. And at the end of this sort of, I think it was an hour-ish long meeting, we didn't have a stenographer. There were no handshakes, but at the end of the meeting, I just said, all right, have we agreed? Will the pool stay in place? And they said, yes. And I said, and will the pool continue to travel on Air Force One? Just point blank. And it was Hope Hicks who said yes. And so then we rode down this elevator at Trump Tower where the negotiations took place. And I, in this, unusual for me as a reporter, became the source and walked over to the waiting press corps, who was always there. Usually I'm on the other end of that rope, but in this case, I stood in front of the cameras and said, we have an agreement, because I wanted it to be public and I wanted it to be written about that they had just agreed to keep the pool in place. So that was a little bit strategic on my part, and it worked.
Great, congratulations. Good stories. First question is Carol McKinley from radio station in Denver. Go ahead, Carol.
My hometown. Hi, Carol.
Is it really? Is that right?
Yes, I'm from Colorado.
Where did you go to high school out here? Where are you from?
Heritage High School, Littleton.
Oh, that's where I am too.
Awesome.
I'm at Cayley and Broadway right now.
Oh, you are.
We talked about how sometimes sometimes the press becomes the story, and that's kind of the TV way, right? The TV reporters versus the print reporters. So I'm wondering about Savannah Guthrie and how she's been criticized because of the aggressive way she questioned President Trump during his town hall last week. People have said that she went after him and it was disrespectful. So what did everybody else think, you and your print colleagues in Reuters and even your video colleagues? But Chris Wallace was kind of on his heels as a moderator. What was the talk of how he was treated by Savannah Guthrie, and do you think Wallace could have been better prepared looking to this next debate?
So I won't speak for anyone else besides myself, and I will also say that Savannah is a friend. She used to cover the White House for NBC, and I'm a big fan of hers, and we have a lot of affection for each other, and I thought she did a great job. I think that the president sometimes objects to tough questions and tough questioning, because his sort of political tactic, and it is often successful, is to equate that with opposition. Steve Bannon, who was the president's strategist at the very beginning of his White House tenure, would refer to reporters as the opposition party. And sort of looping back to my time as Correspondents Association president, I stressed throughout that time that we can't buy into that narrative. We aren't the opposition party just because we're asking tough questions. And I think that there are times when reporters maybe do get into that narrative a little bit too much and allow themselves to be pushed into that role. That is, in my view, definitely not what Savannah did. I think that it's challenging in those types of circumstances, certainly the debate that Chris Wallace did, but also a town hall like that, to moderate and to make sure that facts come out, and that candidates, be it someone like President Trump or any other political candidate for that matter, doesn't just stick with talking points and say things that A, don't answer the question, or B, are not true. And I thought Savannah was very skilled at that. I had sympathy for Chris Wallace and anyone who's had to moderate one of these debates. I think it's a really challenging thing when you've got two candidates, as Chris did, on the stage interrupting each other, and President Trump was certainly, his interrupting was significantly more. He did it more often than Vice President Biden did, but that was just a really hard debate to moderate. I have a lot of respect for Chris as well, and I think he did go into that prepared, and I think he just did not expect it to turn into the melee that it did, and I think that was a shame. And I think that was not that will not go down in debate history in the United States as being one that I think a lot of people look to as a model. But you won't hear me criticizing Chris, or for that matter, any other of my colleagues who gets one of those jobs.
Okay, thanks a lot. Next is Felix Wessel from Deutschlandfunk in Cologne, and he's a former RIAS Prize winner, and he was on the program last October as well. So he must have been in the group when we came to see you at the White House. Go ahead, Felix.
Hi.
Yes, great to see you again, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time. It's such a busy part of the year. And I was wondering what your take is on President Trump's information policy and the White House's information policy during his COVID illness and the corona infection. I watched this press conference with his doctors, and where Sean Connery said he's not on oxygen right now, and he wasn't on oxygen yesterday, and things like that. And his chief of staff, contradicting the official statements of his doctors, but not as an official source. So there seemed to be some misinformation, or at least some, confusion about the correct information. So I was just wondering what your take on this whole situation was and is.
Sure. Well, I guess I would start with a broader answer, which is to say it's always, I think, a challenge for a White House to decide how much medical information they share about the President of the United States, who does have a right to medical privacy in the same way that all of us do. The difference, of course, here was that the president is A, the President of the United States, the most powerful leader in the world. B, had come down with a disease that he had been downplaying for months in his role as the president. And C, was not only contracted the virus, but was taken to the hospital because of that. So I think that journalists and the American people and the world had a right to information about his condition. And, reporters did a good job of seeking that information. And I think the White House largely struggled with how to handle it. And that those first couple of days with those news conferences that you referenced created more questions than they did answers. And that, my view as a reporter, well, this won't surprise any of you, is that it's it's always best to just tell the truth. And honestly, I think if we were having this conversation and I was a former reporter who now is a PR person who advised presidential candidates and advised corporate clients, like some people who leave the media do, I would be saying the same thing. It's always the cover up that is the problem, being open and saying this is what the conditions are, this is what the facts are, that is better. And that is not the approach that they took at the beginning with regard to President Trump's COVID diagnosis. And it's hard to believe in a way that story is now largely over, because he did recover, and he is back on the trail, as all of you know, and is campaigning with vigor and energy in a way that a lot of other people who have experienced COVID have not been able to bounce back in the same way that he has. So, and this is another challenge with covering President Trump. Stories, be it as big as, that was the biggest story in the world for a week, right? Stories like that in this presidency sometimes will just go away because something else will come in that is just as big or bigger. And I don't know what the answer is. I think sometimes it would be nice if we would sit down and reflect and remember some of these stories. Like, who remembers the fact that impeachment was a story this year? That happened this year. It seems like a lifetime ago. So that's a circuitous way of getting to your question. I do think that truth is the key in these things, and I think the White House struggled with its initial response.
Great. Thanks a lot, Felix and Jeff. The next question from another member of that great group of October 2019, Laura Gutkamp from Bayerischer Rundfunk in Munich. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for taking the time. And first of all, I really like the painting.
Thank you.
In your office. Well chosen. So with being so hostile towards journalists, did you ever have a genuine nice moment with Donald Trump?
Yes. And it is, it's sort of fascinating to me about President Trump as a character study that he absolutely does have a different, well, maybe different is the wrong word, but he does have contrasting styles between what he uses when he's on camera and when he's at a rally or when he's at a press conference or a Q&A gaggle versus how he is sort of behind the scenes. And he can be a very warm person behind the scenes. He can be, he comes from the real estate world and also sort of from the hospitality world. And I would say that he likes to be a very hospitable host. Some of the interviews that I've done with him, with other Reuters colleagues in the White House, in the Oval Office, he always starts by saying, hey, can we get you guys something to drink? And he likes to show people around. He likes to, I think part of that is he likes to show that he is the office holder and has these trappings, but he also, I think, takes genuine pleasure in showing people the Oval Office who have never been to the White House before, because it's a cool thing to see. So yes, I have experienced, I'll tell one story. The first time that I met President Trump was when he was doing a rally shortly after he had been elected. So he would have been President-elect Trump then. He was doing a rally somewhere after the election, but before his inauguration, as sort of a thank you tour end to his campaign. And I had not covered his campaign. I had remained at the White House for the end of the Obama administration. So it was my first time seeing his operation up close. And I was on Air Force One and with the rest of the press pool, and the president came back and said hello. And one of my colleagues said, hey, may we introduce ourselves? And we did, and we shook hands, and he was very nice, and he said, nice to meet you, and it was very cordial. And then he got off the plane, we got off the plane, he did a rally and he went straight at some point in his remarks to fake news and I believe the chant CNN sucks. So it was just such a contrast. and part of me wanted to be able to tell the whole audience, hey everybody, just FYI, this president-elect who you're getting really excited about because of his anti-media rhetoric was really nice to the press right before this started. So I can't explain the dichotomy, but the question is good, and I would say that there is one.
Great. Thanks a lot, Laura. Thanks, Jeff. The next question is another one from Colorado. You've brought the Colorado alumni out of the woodwork today. This
So
is
pleased.
Warwick from Colorado. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for doing this. Fellow Littleton resident here. Hey, I've got two questions, if you don't mind. The first, how difficult is it to remain calm in some of those more heated press room sessions that we've all seen? And the second, we've seen a lot of people in the press take kind of a more harsh stance against this president and this White House. What are your feelings on journalists taking that stance after a certain point of constant disinformation?
Okay, on the first question, as far as staying calm, I think that for me, I stay really focused in moments like that, and I try to block out the fact, and it's not necessarily easy to, but I try to block out the fact that, all right, this may become a moment, or this may blow up, and just stay focused on my job. And largely in those cases, I'm trying to get past whatever it is that might be blowing up and just get to the question. Just my job is to ask the question. My job is to seek the truth. My job is to get the facts and just stay sort of laser focused on that. And so I don't have a secret sauce to share about how you stay calm, and I'm not always as calm afterwards. I mean, some of these events I've definitely walked away from, and then my heart rate goes up a little bit afterwards, which isn't to say that it's not going up in real time as well. But I guess my answer to that is just to stay focused. To your second question, I'm not sure I would use the word harsh. I think what you're asking is, there are some reporters who have gone, or some journalists who have maybe veered over into a little bit more of an advocacy / more opinionated role. And because I think you can ask harsh or hard questions without doing that. And I believe I try to ask hard and difficult questions when appropriate without veering into that. And I don't really know the answer for why some of my colleagues have done that. I don't, sort of to circle back to what I said in my opening remarks, I don't think it's helpful to the press to give fodder to those who think we are the opposition party, because we're not. And I do think you can ask all of those questions and get that same kind of information without veering into that kind of a conflict. That doesn't mean with a leader like President Trump that there aren't going to be some contentious exchanges. And I also am not, I wouldn't say that I have the right answer and others who have a different style are wrong. It's just different. We have different styles. That's the style that's effective for me. And my only concern, I guess, about people who might veer into something that looks more like advocacy and less like journalism is, I don't think it's in our interest to do that. And I think you can achieve all of the important goals of tough questioning, and pushing back and fact checking, and as Savannah did the other night, without it becoming a moment where you say, "Hey, you're a liar." There's a difference.
Okay, great. Got another question from Max White in Detroit. Go ahead, Max.
Hey, Jeff. So we obviously know the public battles that President Trump has with the media. I'm really curious about what it was like covering the Obama administration, which, had its sort of private battles with the media, targeting leakers and things like that, along with a bunch of FOIA issues. So just, maybe taking a step back and looking at that.
Sure, and I'm glad you raised that, Max. It is something that is easy to forget right now, because the battles that we've had with, as a press corps with President Trump's administration, have been so public and so visible that it is easy to forget that there there were also really important clashes or critical clashes with the Obama administration about press freedoms as well. I think that I have a little less to share about that because I wasn't involved in any of those legal challenges, for example. But I was on the board of the Correspondents Association for a good chunk of the Obama administration, and we absolutely also had our struggles with that White House, and our struggles there were often more to do with ensuring we could get access to the president and have opportunities to ask questions. That's not a challenge that we have with President Trump's White House. He's very accessible, but the FOIA things that you mentioned and the crackdown on leaking that occurred under the Obama administration were also, really big challenges to journalism and journalists in Washington. And I think it's always important to remind people that despite the fact that covering this president we have these really visible challenges, there's always going to be and always has been a tension between the press corps and the White House, and between journalists and the presidents that we cover. And that is healthy. It is good to have that tension. And it is also okay to stand up for and correct to stand up for the rights of the press. And that sort of is related to what I was saying earlier about advocacy. It's something that I learned in 2017, that while staying neutral, when I was wearing my White House Correspondents Association hat, I actually was an advocate, and it was my job to say, no, it's not right to call us the enemy of the American people, and no, we are not fake news. And it is okay to do that as a reporter while also maintaining neutrality. But that's a little bit of a caveat to your broader question, which was about the Obama administration. And to sum up my answer on that, yes, there were definitely issues there as well. They were just a little less played out in the public sphere.
Okay, great. And the next question, Laura Nunick again. Go ahead, Laura. Short, brief question.
Hello again. So I was just wondering, in case Donald Trump loses the election but won't leave the office, how would the legal procedure or situation look like? Did you ever think that through?
I'm not qualified to answer that question in terms of the legal aspect. I do know that we will be covering that really closely, and I think news organizations have been preparing for that scenario. No doubt on the political reporter side, like myself, but also on the legal side and legal reporters. It's interesting to me, though, that after months of seeking to undermine the upcoming results of this election, the president is now beginning to say he thinks that we'll have the results on November 3rd. So I don't know if we will. I think that if the election result is very clear, if there is a landslide victory on either side, then that will mean that November 3rd will be easier. It'll be easier to determine who the winner is. If it comes down to a few races, and they are races where mail-in ballots have not been counted or finished counting, and it's really, really close, and we may not know on that day, and then there might be legal challenges as you raise. But I'm reluctant to sort of sketch out how that will work legally, because it's just not my area of expertise.
Okay, thanks. And next question is Michelle Adair. She's a Reuters colleague who also works for Reuters TV quite a bit. She was supposed to be on the March program and was actually already in Washington, and we had to cancel the program, but Michelle will be on our next program whenever that happens. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I was interested to hear your take on the Hunter Biden emails. I know a lot of mainstream media haven't reported on that, and there's now suggestions from national security experts that it could be Russian propaganda. Doesn't seem to have had much impact on the polls so far, but do you think there's any risk as more drips out that it could hurt Biden's campaign? And I'd also be interested to hear about your experience yesterday when Trump called you a criminal for not reporting on it. Like, how do you deal with those kind of situations? Thank you.
Sure. It's a tricky one. I think my broad answer to this is that when stories are broken and when I get beat by another news organization on a scoop, the scoop is legit and good when you are able to confirm it. And that has not happened with this New York Post story. Other news organizations have not been able to confirm the legitimacy of some of this stuff. So I think that's one reason why it hasn't had the legs that President Trump's campaign would like it to have. That said, Vice President Biden's campaign, their strategy with regard to Hunter Biden has been largely not to engage at all about questions like this. And I do think that's a sign that they, do not want to fall into the trap that was 2016 and the email controversy with Secretary Clinton. But I also think it means they probably recognize that it's a potential liability for them, for their campaign. And as far as how news organizations have covered it, Reuters has been very careful, and I think that's probably true for a lot of other mainstream news organizations. But whether or not it ends up being a bigger problem is, we'll just for the Biden campaign, I should say, is something I guess we'll continue to see in the coming weeks is if more trickles out. Definitely the Trump campaign wants to focus on it, and I think the president will find a way to do that at the debate this Thursday, as he has during his rallies the last few days. As for the criminal moment that you referenced yesterday, that was definitely a surprise. And it was pretty harsh on the president's case to call a reporter, in this case me, a criminal for not asking or following a story that he once followed. It's concerning that he uses that rhetoric, but it's not surprising because it's what he's sort of using right now broadly to describe people with whom he disagrees, and he's regularly calling Biden and Biden's family criminals at his rallies. And so I think it honestly was just kind of an extension of that when he did it yesterday to me. And I think it's concerning rhetoric.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question to Benny Teichman. He's was going to be on our student program to the U.S. in March that we had to postpone as well. Or no, he's going to be on a program next year, hopefully. Go ahead, Benny.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Jeff. My original question, Jeff, you already partially answered. So it was about, or still is about, neutrality and advocacy. I'm wondering, because you sound really, really sure about that your approach on neutrality is the right one, and I kind of understand both sides. And of course, in the US, it's a little way more extreme than in Germany with neutrality and news networks. So I was wondering, were there any moments when you thought maybe your approach on neutrality is not the right one? And you thought, okay, I really feel like I want to call this president a liar or anything similar.
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. I know I've never had any moments where I have questioned the wisdom of being a neutral reporter. I think if I were to get to that point, then I would need to leave journalism. And I think people who do leave journalism and go on to be advocates or go into different careers or where they have a little bit more professional and personal freedom on those in that level it's a completely legitimate choice. My strength comes from staying neutral, because you can't accuse me, I hope, of being any different in my approach to a President Trump than to a President Obama or a future president, whomever, from whichever party. And it's important to me to hold on to that strength. That said, I don't want to dismiss the fact that sometimes it's really, really challenging, and that has been more challenging in the last 3.5 years, no question. And that, I mean, I'll give you one example. I was at a rally with the president where he was talking about the so-called squad, the Congresswoman AOC from New York and Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, where the crowd started chanting. I think this was in response to specifically to Omar, send her back. And that was suggesting she should go back to her country of birth instead of staying in the United States, where she is both an American citizen and an elected official. And that was hard to witness. It was hard to be in the middle of that day. But so I won't, I'm a human being, and that you don't turn that off as a journalist. But my response or my approach that day was just to write about it and to make sure that people who weren't there knew what was said and could see that and draw their own conclusions from it. And so I think that was my job. To get a little bit more though at your question of advocacy versus journalism or how they intertwine, I don't wear the hat of Correspondents Association president anymore, but I haven't given up my passion for freedom of the press. And so I do think that you can do that and stand up for those values by asking aggressive questions, by also pushing back. I mean, yesterday in that same Q&A that Michelle was asking me about, where the president accused me of being a criminal, he also started saying that Kristen Welker, who's the NBC News correspondent, who's going to be the moderator of this week's final presidential debate, he said, she's a partisan Democrat, and he started saying negative things about her. And both her NBC colleague Kelly O'Donnell and I just said back to him, that's not true. That is not true, Mr. President. And I don't think that was crossing a line. That was just stating back or standing up against things that aren't true. But that's also different in my view, and other journalists have a different perspective on this than using the heated language of saying you're a liar. There's a difference there, and it's a line that I don't want to cross.
Okay, thanks. We're not quite crossed the hour limit line, but if there's no more questions, we can maybe stop a little. I'm just wondering what's next for you. I mean, are you going to be staying at the White House forever? And what are your plans for after this election?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the answer in terms of the longer term, but certainly for the short term, I'll be at the White House. I have no plans to change beats, and probably on the longer term question, I'll probably be there for a while. I like the job, and it's a fascinating beat to cover regardless of who's in office. I really like the opportunity to see history happen, and when there is travel, which there's less and less of now because of COVID, certainly internationally, I get to scratch that itch of having been a foreign correspondent by getting to travel abroad with this job. So I enjoyed that. There are a lot of cool things about the job. There are a lot of less sexy things about the job that we don't talk about. I mean, being part of the pool means also sitting in vans or sitting outside golf courses when various presidents, and I've covered both Obama and President Trump when they go golfing, do leisure activities. It can be sort of the pits to have to sit in a van for hours on end or wait outside while the president tries to have a life, which they're allowed to have. So there are less glamorous aspects of it, but in general, it's a job that I get a lot of fulfillment out of. So I think I'm in it for a while.
Okay, great. We do have a question from Ann Williams. She's from Chicago. She's one of the RIAS board members, was recently added to the board about a year or so ago. And Ann can't get the video working, but she asked me to ask you the question. Is there a concern that there haven't been substantial news conferences with Biden, like in past presidential campaigns, He has certainly been questioned in the primary, but during the general, usually journalists are asking questions of both candidates, and we don't see any press interaction except for in the town halls.
I think that's a terrific question, and and my answer to that is yes. I think that is concerning, and I think that if Vice President Biden becomes the president of the United States, that our challenges as a White House press corps are going to shift dramatically back to sort of where they were during the Obama years, which was about getting access to the president and having an opportunity to ask the important and tough questions that it's our job to do. And I know that Vice President Biden's campaign has been very concerned about the pandemic and policies aside, very specifically about keeping the vice president safe. But I think you can do that and still give him and give reporters a chance to ask tough questions. And I don't think there have been enough of those opportunities in this general election campaign with the Democratic nominee.
Okay. I was wondering as well, what's the mood like right now in the White House? When we were there years ago, it was great. We got to see the Oval Office thanks to you from the outside, which was a thrill for us all. But you read stories in New York Times or LA Times or whatever, and there's stories about the mood that people are getting their resumes ready and abandoning, or people aren't even coming in now because of Corona. You're there every day. What is the mood like to you? And is it different than it was 6 months ago when the economy was going so strong?
And do you mean in terms of the White House staff or the press corps?
Yeah, just in general, the White House staff, or just not among the press, among the White House people you interact with. What's the mood like there right now? Is it different than it was a few months ago?
Certainly the fact that there was an outbreak within the White House of coronavirus had a big impact on the mood for a while. And there were fewer and fewer people coming in with good reason, because they were all getting sick. Mm-hmm. And people who weren't getting sick were quarantining because they were exposed to people who had. So that period was really weird, insofar as it felt a little bit like a ghost town going into the White House. That has passed though, and it's kind of remarkable how quickly it passed, because in the immediate aftermath of the president's diagnosis, people at the White House who hadn't been wearing masks all of a sudden started wearing masks and keeping social distance. And then, now that he's recovered and his staff has recovered, some of those protocols have gone back to kind of pre-pandemic levels or pre-pandemic procedures, which so many others around the world just aren't doing, and because of for health reasons. So that's a specific answer to your question. As far as mood is concerned, the COVID piece aside, the polling shows that President Trump is behind Vice President Biden, no question about that. But I think there's a remarkable sense of kind of quiet confidence that he's going to pull it out and pull it through. And the president had a conference call yesterday with his campaign where he expressed a lot of optimism and said that 2 or 3 weeks ago he wasn't sure he was going to win, but now thinks he will. And I pick up on that from others around him. That may be bravado, but I think it's probably not just bravado. I think that they are seeing polls tightening in the key swing states, and think that they still have a chance. And momentum is everything in elections, and having momentum in the final 2 weeks is more important than having momentum all summer or throughout the fall, which Biden has had. So we'll just see who has the most momentum on election day.
Yeah, great. I remember I just saw this date a day or two ago that the Comey letter 4 years ago, I think it was October 28th or something. I didn't realize it was actually that late. So I don't know, a lot of people have said the Comey letter made a big difference. So there's still plenty of time for things to happen, right? And that sounds like that's the mood in the White House, right? That the staffers are not too worried about looking for a new job right away. They're confident they have a good chance, even if the numbers don't look so good.
I mean, I can't say whether staffers are looking for new jobs. I saw that there was a line about that in a New York Times story. It's certainly possible that some people are looking around and are less confident. I don't have any reporting of my own on that, but I do think that his senior advisors are realistic, but also confident that he can pull it off.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to say? Any questions we didn't ask that you want to answer anyway?
Excellent final question. No, it was great to have the dialogue with you all, and Eric has my contact information, so if anybody wants to follow up with me, you're welcome to at any time.
Great. Well, we're right on the hour. We're all good TV people. We managed to keep it right to 5 p.m. Berlin time. So thanks again, Jeff, and we look forward to reading your stories and seeing you again with our next RIAS group. And thanks everybody for joining the call. Next talk is tomorrow with Geza Eberle from RTL, and hope you can come back. And thanks again, Jeff.
My pleasure. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye.
Bye.